that they erased from history never truly disappeared.
The Second World War is a conflict we think we know. Its history is carved into stone monuments, documented in millions of pages of official records, and seared into our collective memory through iconic photographs and films. We know the grand strategies, the turning points of great battles, the names of the generals who moved armies like chess pieces across the globe. But this official history, as complete as it seems, is built upon a foundation riddled with shadows. Beneath the well-lit stage of conventional warfare lies another, hidden battlefield. A landscape of bizarre accidents, baffling decisions, and mysteries so profound they defy explanation to this day. This is a journey into that twilight zone of the war. We will not be visiting the famous front lines, but the strange peripheries where logic breaks down and fate takes an ironic turn. It's a world where the second most powerful man in a totalitarian empire flies solo to his enemy on a deluded peace mission, where a magnificent ocean liner is destroyed not by a torpedo, but by a single careless spark, and where the most celebrated heroes can simply vanish into thin air. These stories are the war's ghost stories, tales of what-ifs and why-nots that haunt the official record. They reveal a conflict far stranger, more chaotic, and more deeply human than the history books often allow. So, what really happened in the war's darkest corners? If you enjoy deep dives into history's greatest enigmas, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our future investigations. To understand the sheer shock of May 10th, 1941, you first have to understand Rudolf Hess. He was not just another high-ranking Nazi, he was one of the originals. An early and fanatical devotee, he had been with Adolf Hitler from the very beginning, marching alongside him in the failed Beer Hall Putsch of 1923, and later taking dictation for Mein Kampf while they were imprisoned together. Hitler rewarded this loyalty by making him Deputy Führer, officially the second man in the command structure of the Third Reich. He was the conscience of the party, a gatekeeper to Hitler, though by 1941, his actual power was being eroded by more ruthless figures like Martin Bormann and Heinrich Himmler. Hess was also a man of peculiar beliefs. He was deeply invested in astrology, herbal remedies, and mysticism, often seeking advice from unconventional sources. This growing eccentricity had sidelined him from the serious business of running the war, leaving him increasingly desperate to prove his relevance and restore his standing with the Führer. He became obsessed with an idea, brokering a peace deal with Great Britain. He believed against all evidence that a powerful peace party existed within the British aristocracy, one that would oust Winston Churchill if only given the right incentive. As Germany secretly prepared for Operation Barbarossa, the monumental invasion of the Soviet Union, Hess saw his chance. A peace with Britain would secure Germany's Western Front, allowing Hitler to focus all his might on the East. It would be his ultimate gift to his Führer. So, on that May evening, the 47-year-old Deputy Führer, a man who hadn't flown seriously in years, climbed into the cockpit of a specially prepared Messerschmitt Bf-110, a twin-engine fighter bomber. He carried with him maps, charts, and a portfolio of his bizarre peace proposals. Taking off from an airfield near Augsburg, he flew northwest, navigating by landmarks in the fading light, a lone figure on an audacious, unsanctioned, and seemingly insane mission. He was flying towards a destiny he could not possibly have imagined. But was the mission truly his idea alone? After a grueling 5-hour flight, skimming low over the North Sea to evade British radar, Hess reached the coast of Scotland. Running low on fuel and struggling in the darkness, he was forced to bail out just a few miles short of his intended destination. He parachuted down, landing awkwardly in a field near the village of Eaglesham and spraining his ankle. It was there that a local farmer named David McLean, armed with a pitchfork, discovered the downed German pilot. The man initially gave his name as Hauptmann Alfred Horn, but the truth would soon come out, sending shockwaves through the highest levels of the British government. Hess's target had been Dungerville House, the estate of the 14th Duke of Hamilton. Hess was convinced the Duke was his key to peace. He insisted on speaking with him, claiming they had met during the 1936 Berlin Olympics, a claim the Duke later denied. The situation was utterly surreal. The local home guard who had taken Hess into custody were baffled. Here was one of the most wanted men in the world, having practically fallen out of the sky into their laps, calmly asking for a chat with a Scottish nobleman. When the Duke of Hamilton was finally brought in to meet him the next day, the conversation only deepened the confusion. Hess, rambling and at times incoherent, laid out his peace offer. Germany would be granted dominance over continental Europe, and in return it would guarantee the continued existence of the British Empire. It was a fantasy, a non-starter. The Duke, a loyal RAF group captain and friend of Churchill, listened with a mixture of courtesy and astonishment. He realized he was dealing not with a serious diplomatic envoy, but with someone dangerously disconnected from reality. Crucially, Hess admitted from the very beginning that he had come entirely on his own initiative, emphatically denying that Hitler had sent him. In that moment, by renouncing any official backing, Hess unwittingly sealed his fate. He was not an ambassador to be negotiated with. He was simply a very high-profile and very strange prisoner of war. But what did Churchill think of this unexpected gift from the heavens? While Britain was bewildered, Berlin was apoplectic. When the news reached Hitler at his mountain retreat, the Berghof, the reaction was volcanic. His architect, Albert Speer, who was present, described it as an inarticulate, almost animal outcry of rage. Propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels recorded in his diary the sheer panic that gripped the Nazi leadership. How could they explain to the German people and to their allies like Italy and Japan that the deputy Führer had defected to the enemy? Hitler's greatest fear was that Churchill would use the incident to sow discord, perhaps by pretending to negotiate with Hess to make Germany's allies believe they were being betrayed. The damage control was immediate and absolute. The official story broadcast across Germany within hours was that Rudolf Hess, a man tragically suffering from a mental disorder, had succumbed to hallucinations. He was portrayed as a deluded idealist who, in a fit of madness, had stolen a plane. The propaganda machine worked overtime to assure the public that Hess had played no part in any important decisions for years, that he was a peripheral figure whose actions were meaningless. His name was to be erased from public life, his titles were stripped, and Martin Bormann swiftly moved to consolidate the power Hess had vacated. Privately, Hitler was livid, ordering the Luftwaffe to try and shoot down Hess's plane, though it was far too late. This official narrative of the madman served both sides. For Germany, it explained away an embarrassing defection and a catastrophic security breach. For Britain, treating Hess as mentally unstable allowed them to dismiss his peace offers without dignifying them and to hold him as a prisoner rather than an envoy. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, in his own writings, leaned into this interpretation, describing Hess's flight as a deed of lunatic benevolence, implying that however misguided, Hess perhaps believed he was doing something good. But if he was so clearly insane, why did British intelligence spend months interrogating him? And why does the question of his true motive refuse to die? Far from being treated as a simple lunatic, Hess became one of Britain's most prized and perplexing prisoners. He was moved between various secure locations, including for a time the Tower of London. Intelligence officers from MI6 and psychological experts were tasked with cracking him open. Was he faking his delusion? Did he possess secret information about Germany's plans, particularly the upcoming invasion of Russia? The interrogations, however, proved deeply frustrating. Hess was erratic, alternating between moments of clarity and long bouts of paranoid depression. He complained of being poisoned, of being tormented by secret rays, and developed a profound hypochondria. His mental state deteriorated. On June 16, 1941, just over a month after his arrival, he attempted suicide by throwing himself down a staircase, surviving with a broken leg. This only solidified the view of many that he was genuinely unhinged, yet the alternate theory that he was a sanctioned messenger has shown remarkable persistence. This theory gained its most significant boost in 2011, with the emergence of a 28-page statement from Karl-Heinz Pinch, Hess's longtime adjutant. Pinch, who gave the testimony while a prisoner of the Soviets, claimed that Hitler not only knew about the mission, but had calmly received the news of Hess's departure. The plan, according to Pinch, was a deniable peace feeler. If Hess failed, Hitler could simply disavow him and call him insane, which is exactly what happened. Most mainstream historians treat this testimony with extreme caution. It was obtained under duress, potentially torture, and the Soviets had every reason to promote a narrative of collusion between the Nazis and British aristocrats. Furthermore, it contradicts the eyewitness accounts of Hitler's genuine fury. Yet the paradox remains. Hess was tried at Nuremberg, where he feigned amnesia for months before suddenly recovering. He was sentenced to life in prison and became the sole inmate of Berlin's Spandau prison for 2 decades, a living symbol of a defeated regime. He died there in 1987, an apparent suicide at age 93, a death that itself spawned another wave of conspiracy theories. To the very end, he never gave a clear, consistent explanation for his flight. Was he a disturbed man driven by delusion, a loyal soldier on a mission so secret it required his complete sacrifice, or perhaps most unsettlingly, a little bit of both? Before she was a casualty of war, she was a masterpiece of peace. Launched in 1935, the SS Normandy was more than a ship. She was a floating declaration of French artistry and engineering prowess. She was, for a time, the largest and fastest passenger ship in the world, wresting the coveted blue ruband for the speediest Atlantic crossing from her rivals. Her profile was sleek and powerful, but her interiors were where she truly stunned. The first-class dining hall was a breathtaking Art Deco marvel, longer than the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, adorned with towering pillars of Lalique glass. She was a floating palace, carrying nearly 2,000 passengers in unprecedented luxury, served by a crew of over 1,300. Hollywood stars, industrial tycoons, and European royalty all walked her decks. She was the most glamorous liner of a glamorous era, a symbol of progress and international connection, but her golden age would be tragically brief. In late August 1939, as the clouds of war gathered over Europe, the Normandy was docked in New York City. On September 1st, Germany invaded Poland. 2 days later, as France and Britain declared war, the great liner was ordered to remain in the sanctuary of the neutral American port. She would never see her home port of Le Havre again. For months, she sat majestically but silently at Pier 88, a beautiful refugee, soon joined by her British rival, the RMS Queen Mary, and later the new RMS Queen Elizabeth. The 3 greatest liners in the world huddled together in the Hudson, waiting out the storm. After the fall of France in June 1940, the situation grew tense. The Normandy was now the property of the collaborationist Vichy regime, and American authorities feared that German or Vichy agents might try to sabotage her or spirit her away. US Coast Guard personnel were placed on board to stand watch alongside her French skeleton crew, who diligently maintained the ship's complex systems, including its state-of-the-art firewatch. For over 2 years, the great ship was safe but idle. Then came December 7, 1941. With America's entry into the war, the Normandy's fate was sealed. She was no longer a neutral guest. She was a strategic asset. What happened next was a tragedy of haste, hubris, and catastrophic error. On December 12, 1941, just 5 days after Pearl Harbor, federal authorities officially seized the Normandy under the right of angourie, a legal doctrine allowing a nation at war to appropriate neutral property within its borders. The US Navy took possession, renaming her the USS Lafayette, in honor of the French general who aided the American Revolution. The plan was ambitious and urgent: convert the world's most luxurious liner into a massive troop transport capable of carrying an entire division, over 10,000 soldiers, to Europe. The Navy wanted it done, and they wanted it done yesterday. The pressure was immense. America's shipyards were already overwhelmed with building and repairing warships, so the decision was made to perform the conversion right at Pier 88. It was a scene of organized chaos. Hundreds of civilian contractors swarmed the vessel, working alongside Navy personnel. Communication was poor, and jurisdictions were blurred. The ship's opulent fittings, the Lalique glass, the elegant furniture, the priceless artworks were hastily stripped out and carted away. In their place would go bunks, mess halls, and anti-aircraft guns. But in the rush to meet a mid-February deadline, critical safety protocols were ignored or deliberately bypassed. The most fatal oversight involved the ship's firefighting systems. The Normandy had been designed with an exceptionally advanced fire suppression network. However, during the conversion, this system was shut down. Even worse, the ship's fire hydrants were sized to French standards. A crucial contract to weld American-sized adapters onto them had not yet been completed. This meant that in the event of a fire, the hoses of the New York City Fire Department would be useless. It was a blunder of epic proportions, a disaster waiting to happen. As one critic later famously quipped, "Boy, I really hope somebody got fired for that." The stage was set for tragedy. All that was needed was a single, tiny spark. The afternoon of February 9, 1942 was bitterly cold. Inside the Normandy's former Grand Salon, a team of welders was working to remove the last of the lavish decorative stanchions. Around 2:30 p.m., a welder named Clement Derrick was using an acetylene torch to cut through a metal base. A shower of hot sparks flew from his torch. Unbeknownst to him, workers had stacked thousands of life vests nearby. These vests were filled with kapok, a highly flammable cotton-like fiber, and wrapped in burlap. One spark was all it took. The pile of life vests ignited in a flash. Workers frantically tried to beat out the flames with their coats and grab fire extinguishers. But the fire, fed by the flammable kapok and fanned by a strong westerly wind blowing through the ship's open portals, grew with terrifying speed. Alarms sounded, but the ship's own disabled sprinkler system remained silent. The New York City Fire Department responded with legendary speed, but when they arrived, they faced a nightmare. Their hoses didn't fit. They were forced to pump water from fireboats and run lines from the shore, but the blaze was already raging out of control, consuming the ship's lavish wooden interiors and sending a massive column of black smoke over the city. By early evening, the firefighters had gained the upper hand on the flames, but a new, more insidious enemy was at work: gravity. An estimated 6,000 tons of water had been pumped onto the ship's upper decks, and with the scuppers clogged, it had nowhere to go. The Normandy became dangerously top-heavy. She began to list ominously to her port side. A desperate failed attempt at counter-flooding only made things worse. Shortly after midnight, with the groaning of stressed steel echoing across the pier, the order was given to abandon ship. In the early hours of February 10th, the mighty liner succumbed, slowly rolling onto her side in the icy sludge of the Hudson. Miraculously, only one life was lost, but a question immediately hung in the smoke-filled air. Could this colossal failure truly have been just an accident? In the wake of the disaster, the FBI and Navy launched extensive investigations. They brought the unlucky welder Clement Derrick back to recreate the event under controlled conditions. Sure enough, sparks from his torch instantly ignited a similar pile of life vests. The official inquiries all reached the same conclusion. The fire was a tragic accident born of gross negligence, rushed work, and a chain of catastrophic mistakes. Case closed. But in the shadowy world of the New York waterfront, a different story was being told. A story of the most audacious protection racket in American history. This underworld narrative centers on one man, Charles "Lucky" Luciano. Though serving a lengthy prison sentence, Luciano still held immense power over the city's docks through his lieutenants in the Genovese crime family. According to this theory, Luciano's associates, likely led by the feared dock boss Anthony Anastasio, deliberately set the Normandy fire. It wasn't an act of pro-Axis sabotage, it was a business proposition. The spectacular fire was a demonstration. It was meant to prove to the US government that the docks were vulnerable and that only one organization had the power to truly secure them: the Mafia. The message was clear: you need us. It sounds like a screenplay, but what happened next is a matter of declassified historical record. Terrified by the Normandy fire and the real threat of German U-boats sinking ships just off the coast, US naval intelligence made a secret pact with organized crime. In a clandestine program codenamed Operation Underworld, Navy officers met with Luciano himself. The deal was struck. The mob would use its iron grip on the Unions to gather intelligence and prevent any strikes or enemy sabotage on the waterfront. In exchange for his patriotic cooperation, Luciano was moved to a more comfortable prison, and in 1946, his sentence was commuted and he was deported to Italy. Did the Mafia really burn the Normandy to kickstart this devil's bargain? No one was ever charged, and no definitive proof has ever surfaced. Yet, the circumstantial evidence is tantalizing. Was the mob simply opportunistic, capitalizing on a tragedy? Or did they create the crisis to sell the cure, forcing the United States government into an alliance it would keep secret for decades? The Battle of the Atlantic was the war's longest, most grueling campaign. It was a war of tonnage, a struggle to the death between Germany's U-boat fleet and the Allied convoys that were Britain's lifeline. In this brutal underwater theatre, U-boat commanders were the knights of the deep, and none was more celebrated than Kapitänleutnant Günther Prien. Prien was daring, skilled, and possessed an almost instinctual feel for submarine warfare. He commanded U-47, a Type 6IB U-boat that would become one of the most famous submarines in history. Prien and his crew were catapulted to immortality in the war's opening weeks. In the early hours of October 14, 1939, he achieved the unthinkable. He navigated U-47 through a complex web of block ships and treacherous currents to penetrate Scapa Flow, the main anchorage of the British Royal Navy's home fleet. It was considered an impregnable fortress. Once inside, Prien coolly lined up his shot and fired torpedoes into the hull of the battleship HMS Royal Oak. The massive warship sank in minutes, taking over 800 sailors with her. Prien slipped away as silently as he had arrived. The raid was a stunning humiliation for the Royal Navy and an immense propaganda victory for Germany. Prien was awarded the Knight's Cross by Hitler himself and became a national hero, nicknamed the Bull of Scapa Flow. A snorting bull emblem was painted on U-47's conning tower, a symbol that soon represented the entire 7th U-boat flotilla. For the next year and a half, Prien and U-47 continued to prowl the Atlantic, becoming one of the most successful aces of the deep. They sank over 30 ships, racking up a colossal tonnage score and contributing significantly to the happy time when U-boats inflicted devastating losses on Allied shipping. By early 1941, Prien was a legend, and U-47 was a symbol of German naval invincibility. This made what happened next all the more shocking and mysterious. In late February 1941, U-47 departed from its new base in Lorient, France, for its 10th combat patrol. The strategic situation was changing. The British were getting better at convoy defense, employing more escort ships equipped with ASDIC, an early form of sonar, and improving their tactics. The happy time was ending. Prien was now part of a wolf pack, a group of U-boats coordinating their attacks to overwhelm a convoy's defenses. In early March, his group made contact with the westbound convoy OB-293, south of Iceland. On the night of March 6th and into the 7th, the wolf pack struck. Under the cover of darkness, U-47 launched torpedoes, scoring hits and contributing to the chaos. Prien even torpedoed a massive 20,000-ton whale factory ship, crippling the vessel. But the convoy's escort screen reacted with ferocity. The destroyers HMS Wolverine and HMS Verity, along with several smaller corvettes, began a relentless counterattack. They were a seasoned team determined to make the U-boats pay. Just after midnight on March 8th, they began a deadly cat-and-mouse game. According to the Royal Navy's official reports from the battle, the Wolverine and Verity gained a firm sonar contact on a submerged U-boat. For the next 5 hours, they hunted it mercilessly through the icy waters, dropping pattern after pattern of depth charges. These were powerful explosives set to detonate at specific depths, designed to crack a submarine's pressure hull. At around 5 a.m., lookouts on the Wolverine reportedly caught a fleeting glimpse of the submarine, as it was forced briefly to the surface before diving again. The destroyers closed in for the kill, boxing it in. Suddenly, a massive underwater explosion sent an orange-red glow boiling up to the surface. After that, there was only silence and the smell of oil on the water. The British were certain they had killed Prien and avenged the Royal Oak. But had they? Back in Germany, U-47 was noted as overdue, then missing. The High Command, unwilling to damage public morale, kept the loss of their greatest submarine ace a secret for over 2 months. It was only in late May 1941, after British propaganda began taunting, "Where is Prien?" that Germany reluctantly announced he was presumed lost. For the remainder of the war and for years after, the story stood: HMS Wolverine had sunk U-47. But post-war analysis of naval records from both sides began to unravel this tidy conclusion. Researchers discovered a crucial discrepancy. The submarine that the Wolverine and Verity had so relentlessly depth-charged was almost certainly not U-47. It was another U-boat from the same wolf pack, UA, commanded by Hans Eckermann. His submarine sustained heavy damage in the exact area at the exact time of the British attack, but miraculously, it survived and managed to limp back to France. Eckermann's own logbooks provided a verified account that overlapped perfectly with the British reports. If the Wolverine didn't sink U-47, then what did? The mystery was wide open again. Several compelling theories remain. It's possible U-47 was sunk by one of the other convoy escorts, the corvettes HMS Camellia and HMS Arbutus, which also reported carrying out depth charge attacks that night. Though none were confirmed as kills at the time, another possibility is a mechanical failure. A leak or a battery explosion could have doomed the sub in the heat of combat. Perhaps the most ironic theory is that Prion fell victim to one of his own weapons. German torpedoes in 1941 were notoriously unreliable. Some were fitted with magnetic pistols that could malfunction, and others had faulty guidance systems that could cause a torpedo that missed its target to circle back and strike the submarine that launched it. There are at least 3 documented cases of this happening to other U-boats. Without the discovery of a wreck on the ocean floor, the true fate of Günther Prion and U-47 remains one of the great unsolved ghost stories of the Battle of the Atlantic. What really happened in those dark, frigid waters on March 8, 19... What do you think happened to U-47? Let me know your theory in the comments. And if you're finding these stories fascinating, take a moment to hit that like button. It really helps the channel. While soldiers, sailors, and spies fought on the battlefields, another kind of war was being waged. A war for hearts and minds, for morale. And on that front, America had a secret weapon, the sound of Glenn Miller. By the early 1940s, Alton Glenn Miller was not just a musician, he was a phenomenon. His orchestra, with its unique clarinet-led reed section, had created a sound that defined an era. Hits like In the Mood, Moonlight Serenade, and Chattanooga Choo Choo were more than just songs, they were the soundtrack to American life. From 1939 to 1942, he was the nation's best-selling recording artist, a millionaire celebrity whose fame was at its absolute peak. In 1942, with America now fully embroiled in the war, the 38-year-old Miller made a stunning decision. He was too old for the draft and was earning the modern equivalent of nearly $20 million a year. He gave it all up. Driven by a profound sense of patriotism, he volunteered for military service, convincing the army that he could make a greater contribution with a trombone than with a rifle. Commissioned as a captain in the Army Air Forces, he set about building the finest military band ever assembled, the 50-piece Army Air Forces Orchestra. His goal was to bring a slice of home to the troops, boosting their morale with the swinging, optimistic sound they loved. His efforts were a monumental success. The band toured stateside bases, played on countless radio broadcasts, and became a beloved institution. In the summer of 1944, shortly after D-Day, Major Miller took his band overseas to England. They performed for Allied servicemen in hangars and hospitals, often just miles from the front lines, and their broadcasts over the BBC and Armed Forces Network reached millions. Proud Miller's music became a symbol of the Allied cause, a vibrant, hopeful sound that stood in stark contrast to the grim realities of war. He was at the height of his second wave of fame, a military hero and a musical icon. This is what made his sudden, inexplicable disappearance so shocking. By December 1944, Allied forces had liberated Paris, and Miller was eager to take his band to the continent. A grand Christmas concert was planned for the troops in the French capital. To prepare, Miller was slated to fly ahead of his orchestra to make logistical arrangements for their performances and housing. On December 15th, his official military transport was cancelled due to treacherous winter weather that had socked in much of England and northern Europe, with freezing fog and low cloud cover. Determined to get to Paris on time, Miller pulled some strings. He arranged to hitch a ride with a friend, Lieutenant Colonel Norman Barsol, on a small single-engine utility plane, a UC-64 Norseman. It was an informal, unauthorized flight, a common practice for officers trying to get around in the chaos of wartime Europe. The pilot was Flight Officer John Morgan. Shortly before 2 p.m, the three men took off from RAF Twinwood Farm, an airfield in southern England, and headed out over the English Channel. Miller, known to be a nervous flyer, reportedly joked with an officer on the ground, "Hey, where are the parachutes?" Once the little plane climbed into the thick grey mist, it was never seen or heard from again. For days there was only confusion. When the rest of the band arrived in Paris by a different route and their leader wasn't there to meet them, alarm bells began to ring. Because the flight was unauthorized, the military had no official record of it, and it took until December 23rd for the Army Air Forces to officially declare the plane missing. On Christmas Eve 1944, the world received the stunning news. Major Glenn Miller was presumed lost at sea. The man who had provided the hopeful soundtrack for the war had vanished without a trace, his final note swallowed by the silence of the fog. What could have brought down the small, sturdy plane? The US military's investigation concluded that the most probable cause was a tragic accident. The UC-64 Norseman's engine carburetor was known to be susceptible to icing in the kind of cold, damp conditions they were flying in, compounded by pilot disorientation in the thick fog, a phenomenon known as vertigo. It's highly likely the engine failed and the plane plunged into the icy channel with no chance of recovery. It was a simple, plausible, and sad end to a brilliant career. For decades, this was the accepted story. But it wasn't the only one. In the 1980s, a British RAF veteran named Fred Shaw came forward with an extraordinary claim. Shaw had been a navigator on a Lancaster bomber on December 15, 1944. He stated his squadron had been recalled from an aborted bombing run over Germany, and, as was standard procedure, they jettisoned their payload of bombs over a designated drop zone in the English Channel before landing. From his vantage point, Shaw claimed he witnessed a small single-engine plane, matching the description of a Norseman, flying below them. He watched in horror as the plane was caught in the cascade of explosions from their jettisoned bombs, flipped over, and spiraled into the sea. This friendly fire theory is dramatic and tantalizing. Could Miller have been the victim of a one-in-a-million tragic coincidence? While the story is compelling, many historians and aviation experts remain skeptical. Shaw's account has inconsistencies, and the poor visibility that day would have made it extremely difficult to positively identify a small aircraft from thousands of feet above. Furthermore, official records do not place Miller's flight path directly in the designated bomb jettison area, though flight paths in wartime were often fluid. Other, more sensational rumors have popped up over the years that Miller died of a heart attack in Paris or was part of a secret intelligence operation, but these lack any credible evidence. Ultimately, without the discovery of the aircraft's wreckage, we are left with the official verdict of a weather-related crash, haunted by the lingering, unprovable story of a man who saw a small plane fall from the sky. Of all the secret fears that kept Allied leaders awake at night, one stood above all others: the spectre of a Nazi atomic bomb. German scientists, after all, had been the first to discover nuclear fission As the war progressed, the Allies launched the massive, top-secret Manhattan Project to build a bomb, driven by the terrifying assumption that the Germans were doing the same. But in reality, the German nuclear program, known as the Uranverein or Uranium Club, was a far more fragmented and less focused affair. Led by the world-renowned physicist Werner Heisenberg, the German effort suffered from internal rivalries, a lack of resources, and a critical strategic misstep. Heisenberg and his team focused their primary efforts on building a nuclear reactor to generate power, not on producing the highly enriched uranium or plutonium needed for a bomb. By late 1944, as Allied forces closed in, they hadn't even achieved a self-sustaining chain reaction. A special Allied intelligence mission, codenamed ULSOS, followed the troops into Europe, capturing German scientists and facilities. Their conclusion was clear: Germany was not even close to building an atomic weapon. This is the mainstream historical record, supported by mountains of evidence. And yet, a persistent, chilling counter-narrative exists. It emerges from the desperate final months of the Reich, a time when the Nazi regime was pinning its hopes on the development of Wunderwaffen, or wonder weapons. These were advanced technologies like the V-2 rocket and the Messerschmitt 262 jet fighter, that they believed could still turn the tide of the war. It is in this context of last-ditch desperation that we must examine the events at Johnestol, a valley in the state of Thuringia in central Germany. Here, from late 1944, the SS directed a massive, ultra-secret construction project using thousands of slave laborers to carve a vast network of tunnels and underground chambers into the mountainside. The project's true purpose remains a mystery, but some believe it was the intended site for the war's most terrible secret. The main focus of the German bomb theory is the Ohrdruf military training ground, adjacent to the Johnestol tunnel complex. It is here, on the night of March 4, 1945, that something extraordinary is alleged to have happened. Multiple local witnesses later came forward with stories of a bizarre and terrifying event. One of the most cited is that of a woman named Clara Werner. She described seeing a sudden, blinding flash of light that illuminated everything. It was so bright, it was as if 100 bolts of lightning had struck at once. She noted its eerie coloration, changing from red to yellow, and recalled that a powerful wind, like a shockwave, followed moments later. In the days that followed, Werner and other residents reportedly suffered from nosebleeds, headaches, and a feeling of intense pressure in their ears, symptoms consistent with exposure to a blast wave and perhaps radiation. An even more gruesome account comes from a man named Heinz Vockmuth, who was working on the tunnel construction. He claimed that the day after the blast, he was ordered by SS officers to help load bodies onto trucks for cremation. He described the victims as being badly burned and completely hairless, piled high near the test site. Vockmuth recalled overhearing the officers mention that a new weapon had been tested, something the whole world would talk about. Hesitating, these witness accounts paint a disturbing picture of an event far beyond a conventional explosion. For decades, they were largely dismissed as battlefield rumors or exaggerated memories from the chaotic end of the war. But they gained new weight with the post-Cold War release of archival documents and the work of independent researchers who began to piece together a narrative that had been hidden for half a century. Could these local residents have been eyewitnesses to one of history's most terrifying secrets? Proponents of the Johnestol test hypothesis point to several key pieces of evidence beyond the witness testimonies. The most significant is a Soviet intelligence report sent directly to Joseph Stalin in late March 1945. The report, based on a reliable source in Germany, described 2 large explosions in Thuringia. It explicitly stated that the blasts had a highly radioactive effect and that prisoners of war located in the epicenter were killed, often leaving no trace. The report even warned that this new German weapon could potentially slow down the Red Army's final offensive. The fact that this information reached Stalin himself indicates how seriously the Soviets were taking the threat. In the early 2000s, German historian Rainer Karlsch published a controversial book titled Hitler's Bomb, arguing that a team of scientists working under physicist Kurt Diebner, a rival of Heisenberg's, had successfully tested a rudimentary nuclear device. Karlsch's thesis is not that they built a full-scale atomic bomb like the one dropped on Hiroshima, but rather a smaller tactical hybrid device that used conventional high explosives to trigger a limited nuclear fission-fusion reaction. To support his claims, Karlsch commissioned soil analyses from the purported test site. His findings, he claimed, showed unnatural concentrations of radioactive isotopes like cesium-137 and cobalt-60, which do not occur in nature and could be the residue of a nuclear event. The theory suggests that this test may have been conducted by a rogue SS-led program, separate from Heisenberg's mainstream effort, explaining why the top scientist knew nothing about it. The Johnestol facility was, after all, under the direct control of the SS, not the Army's Weapons Bureau. Could a small, desperate faction of the Nazi regime, armed with a limited amount of nuclear material, have managed to achieve a partial, low-yield nuclear blast in a last-ditch effort to stave off defeat? Despite the tantalizing witness accounts and the Soviet spy report, the overwhelming consensus among mainstream historians and physicists is that Germany did not test a nuclear device. The counter-arguments are powerful and based on multiple lines of evidence. The most fundamental problem is the lack of fissile material. A nuclear fission explosion requires a critical mass of either highly enriched uranium, U-235, or plutonium. All captured German records and post-war analysis confirm that they had failed to produce anywhere near the quantity needed for even the smallest bomb. At best, they had grams, they needed kilograms. Then there are the farm hall transcripts. In 1945, 10 of Germany's top nuclear scientists, including Heisenberg, Otto Hahn, and Kurt Deibner himself, were secretly recorded while detained at a British safehouse. When they learned of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, their conversations revealed genuine shock, disbelief, and a struggle to even comprehend how the Allies could have achieved it. Heisenberg is heard saying, "I don't believe a word of the whole thing. If they had successfully tested even a rudimentary device just months earlier, their reaction makes no sense, unless they were all part of an elaborate, perfectly maintained deception, which seems highly unlikely in their private, candid conversations." As for the physical evidence, Karlsruhe's soil sample findings have been strongly challenged. In 2006, Germany's premier Federal Physics Institute conducted its own comprehensive, high-precision analysis of the soil at the Ohrdruf site. Their conclusion was unequivocal. They found no abnormal radioactivity beyond what could be explained by background radiation and fallout from atmospheric tests and the Chernobyl disaster. If a nuclear blast had occurred, it would have left an undeniable isotopic signature. It simply wasn't there. So what did the witnesses see? It may have been the test of a massive conventional fuel-air bomb, which can create a mushroom cloud and a powerful blast, or their memories may have been colored by the later news of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. While the Jonastal mystery remains fascinating, the verdict of science suggests that Hitler's phantom bomb was, in the end, just a phantom. In the vast, frozen wilderness of the high Arctic, Germany fought a silent and crucial battle. It was a battle against the weather. For the U-boats prowling the North Atlantic, an accurate forecast was the difference between a successful hunt and a watery grave. Storms, sea ice, and gale-force winds could scatter convoys, but they could also sink submarines. As the Allies got better at sinking German weather ships, the German Navy, the Kriegsmarine, turned to a more audacious solution, a network of secret land-based weather stations deep in the Arctic Circle. The most ambitious of these was Operation Schatzgräber. The name translates to treasure hunter, but the treasure they sought wasn't gold or jewels, it was data. Keen, in September 1943, a small German expedition slipped through Allied patrols and navigated the treacherous, ice-choked waters to reach Alexandra Land, a remote uninhabited island in the Franz Josef Land archipelago, north of Russia and deep inside Soviet territory. The team of about 10 men, meteorologists, radio operators and laborers, worked in punishing conditions to erect prefabricated huts and set up their sensitive equipment on a barren, windswept gravel spit. Their location was one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. By November, as the perpetual darkness of the polar night descended, the station was operational. The men endured howling winds, crushing isolation, and temperatures that plunged far below zero. To protect against curious polar bears or a potential Soviet patrol, they laid a defensive minefield around their small camp. Their lifeline was a long-range Focke-Wulf Condor aircraft that would occasionally brave the perilous flight to parachute crates of food, fuel, and mail. From this lonely outpost, the Schatzgräber team began transmitting regular, coded weather reports back to Naval Command. This invaluable stream of data, this meteorological treasure, gave German U-boats a vital edge, making this tiny forgotten station one of the most strategically important German assets in the entire Battle of the Atlantic. And the Allies had no idea it even existed. Life at Schatzgräber was a monotonous cycle of survival and science. The men read novels, played cards, and tried to stave off the psychological strain of complete isolation and confinement. One of the biggest morale killers was the food. Day after day, their diet consisted of canned meats, canned vegetables, and hard biscuits. The craving for fresh food, for a proper steak, became an obsession. The local wildlife, particularly the majestic polar bears that sometimes wandered near the camp, started to look less like a threat and more like a meal on the hoof. In late May 1944, with the polar day bringing 24-hour sunlight, 2 of the crew decided to take matters into their own hands. They successfully hunted a large polar bear, a moment of triumph for the weary men. The station's cook, who was also a meteorological assistant, carved thick steaks from the carcass. That night, the crew prepared for a feast. In their eagerness for fresh protein, they made a fatal mistake. Unfamiliar with the dangers of Arctic game, they cooked the meat lightly. Some, craving a rare delicacy, may have even eaten it partially raw. These men were about to learn a brutal lesson in microbiology. Within days, a nightmare began. The cook himself was the first to fall ill, suffering from a high fever and severe pains in his legs. Then, one by one, almost every other man who had eaten the meat was struck down. They were racked with agonizing muscle inflammation, weakness, fits of delirium, and intense gastrointestinal distress. Only the station's medic, a man who had wisely decided to stick to the canned goods, remained healthy. He quickly diagnosed the cause: trichinosis. The crew had ingested the parasitic larvae of a tiny roundworm, Trichinella spiralis, which is common in raw or undercooked bear meat. They had unwittingly poisoned themselves. The treasure-hunting operation was in jeopardy, brought to its knees by a microscopic worm. The situation at Schatzgräber became desperate. The men were too sick to perform their duties. The vital weather reports grew infrequent, then stopped altogether as they writhed in pain. They managed to get a distress call out by radio, and the German High Command, recognizing the station's importance, mounted an ambitious rescue mission. A Focke-Wulf Condor was dispatched from occupied Norway, carrying a doctor and medical supplies. The initial plan was for the doctor to parachute down to the stricken crew, but upon arriving over the island in early July, the pilot, recognizing the gravity of the situation, took an incredible risk. He decided to attempt a landing. The crew on the ground, sick as they were, managed to hastily clear a makeshift airstrip on the bumpy tundra. The landing was rough. The big 4-engine plane's landing gear was damaged on the unforgiving ground, but it was down. The pilot and doctor now found themselves marooned with the ailing men. For several frantic days, they treated the victims while improvising repairs to the damaged aircraft. Finally, on July 11, 1944, the plane was deemed airworthy enough for one last flight. The entire crew, weak and feverish, was loaded aboard the patched-up Condor. They left everything behind: their huts, their equipment, their diaries, and the ring of live landmines hidden in the frozen ground. The Condor roared down the makeshift runway and barely managed to lift off, successfully evacuating the entire team to safety. The Schatzgräber station, once a critical weapon in the war, was abruptly abandoned. It was a total operational failure. A top-secret Nazi military base, located deep in enemy territory, invisible to the Allies, had been single-handedly defeated and completely neutralized by a dead polar bear. For decades, the site sat forgotten, a frozen monument to one of the war's most bizarre and ironic stories, until Russian researchers finally excavated the remains in 2016, confirming the tale that sounds more like fiction than fact. When the last shots of a war are fired, the silence that follows is filled with echoes. They are the echoes of unresolved questions, of stories without endings, of fates that remain unknown. The bizarre flight of Rudolf Hess, the fiery death of the Normandy, the silent disappearance of U-47, the vanishing of Glenn Miller, the phantom bomb of Thuringia, and the ironic defeat of Schatzgräber. These are more than just historical footnotes. They are essential parables about the true nature of conflict. They teach us that history is not a neat and tidy narrative written by the victors. It is a sprawling, chaotic, and deeply human epic, governed as much by madness, incompetence, and sheer dumb luck as it is by genius, strategy, and bravery. These mysteries persist because they resist the comfort of simple answers. They live in the grey borderlands between fact and speculation, where official reports feel strangely incomplete and conspiracy theories offer a tempting, if unproven, clarity. They show us a world where the line between a secret order and a personal delusion can blur into nothingness, where a government in its desperation.
Thank you for watching. And if you want the Project Redacted to expose the darkest secrets they tried to bury, subscribe now, because the truth doesn't hide itself. Powerful people hide it, and we're here to bring it to light.